Nobody tells you this part about saving someone. That sometimes the person you pull back from the edge doesn't thank you. They erase you. I learned that the hard way. The first time I realized Tessa might not survive the night, I was standing barefoot on the cold tile of my bathroom in a Denver sublet, holding my phone so tightly my fingers went numb, listening to her breathe like she had to remind herself how. She kept whispering that she didn't want to be here anymore. Not in my apartment, not in her life, not anywhere. And a sick, selfish thought kept looping in my head that if she stopped breathing while I was on the line, I would never forgive myself, even if I did everything right. I told her to stay with me, to keep talking, to tell me what she could see. She said the ceiling fan, slow and steady, spinning like time was mocking her. I wanted to sound calm, like someone who knew how to save another person, but the truth is I was terrified and improvising, borrowing confidence because she needed it. I had known Tessa since college, the kind of friendship built on shared routines and small loyalties, late-night grocery runs, bad dates dissected on the couch, jokes that never made sense to anyone else. She was magnetic, the kind of woman who made people feel chosen. When she started fading, replies slower, laughter delayed, eyes no longer meeting yours. I told myself it was stress, a rough patch, adulthood wearing her down. Then she stopped replying for days. Then she showed up at my door one morning in a sweatshirt that smelled like stale coffee, mascara smeared as if she'd tried to wash her face and stopped halfway, and she said, very calmly, that she didn't trust herself to be alone. That sentence changes the air in a room. You feel it in your chest, like gravity suddenly got heavier. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. I meant it without hesitation, without conditions, without imagining what that promise would eventually cost me. My life back then was steady, not glamorous, but solid. A communications job at a mid-sized nonprofit, a decent apartment, a boyfriend named Owen, who liked to call me sensible in a way that felt like a compliment, until it didn't. I lived inside routines that made me feel safe, meal prep on Sundays, yoga classes I barely enjoyed, spreadsheets that made me feel like I was holding the future still. Tessa arrived like an unannounced emergency, and I rearranged everything without questioning it. I canceled plans. I worked from home. I slept lightly, always listening for movement in the next room. The early days were simple in the way emergencies are simple. I took her to urgent care when she admitted she hadn't slept in days. I sat beside her in sterile rooms with posters about anxiety and pamphlets that promised relief in neat bullet points. I wrote down medication names because her hands shook too badly. I made food and watched her stare at it like it belonged to someone else. I checked on her constantly without making it obvious, because she hated feeling watched, hated feeling like a patient. At night, she paced my living room in socks, talking softly about how her thoughts felt sharp, how every idea cut into the next, how she was sure she'd ruined her life, and everyone was only pretending to still love her. Sometimes she cried without sound, tears sliding down her cheeks while she kept talking, like her body was leaking grief without permission. I listened until my chest hurt, until my jaw ached from holding myself together. I asked Owen for space, because my best friend was not okay. He said he understood, but his voice tightened anyway, like something inside him was bracing. He came by once with groceries and tried to help, but Tessa flinched when he spoke, even gently. Later, she apologized and said she hated men right now. Not personally, just as a category. Owen stopped coming over after that. I didn't blame him. I also didn't chase him. Some nights, when Tessa finally slept, curled on my couch like a question mark, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every story about people who missed the signs, who assumed someone was exaggerating, who thought love alone would fix it. I promised myself I would not be that person. I didn't notice how that promise started to define me, how being her lifeline slowly became my entire sense of worth. Her therapist later called it support fatigue, when I admitted, quietly, that I was starting to resent her sadness. The word sounded manageable, almost kind. I felt ashamed anyway. How do you resent someone you love? Someone who might not be alive without you? Tessa got better in visible ways first. She slept. She ate. Her face began to look like itself again. She laughed once when I burned toast, and the smoke alarm went off, and the sound almost made me cry because it meant she was still there, still reachable. We celebrated small victories like holidays. A solo doctor's appointment. An afternoon without texting me. A casual call where she said she'd been in a bookstore, just browsing like a normal person. I told her I was proud of her, and meant it so hard it made my throat ache. She started talking about the future again. About maybe getting her own place, maybe going back to work, about feeling like the fog was thinning. She used words like maybe, and soon instead of never. I started breathing again. One evening while we washed dishes, her hands submerged in warm, soapy water, she looked at me and said, "You saved my life, Claire." It felt like a heavy crown settling on my head. I told her I didn't save her. I just stayed. But she shook her head and said I was the only one who didn't give up on her. That sentence followed me for months because part of me loved it, and part of me felt trapped by it. Like gratitude had turned into a quiet contract I hadn't agreed to sign. She moved into her own studio in the spring. We drank cheap champagne on her balcony overlooking a parking lot, and she cried from gratitude. She promised she would keep going to therapy, keep taking her meds, keep rebuilding. She promised she would never forget what I did. I believed her because I needed it to mean something permanent, something worth the cost. Around the same time, my relationship with Owen quietly fell apart. We argued about my distance, about how every conversation felt crowded by someone else's crisis. He said he felt like he was competing with an invisible emergency. He said he wanted a partner, not a nurse. I stared at him across a cafe table, my hands wrapped around a mug I wasn't drinking, wanting to scream that I wasn't a nurse. I was a friend. That this was what loyalty looked like. After he left, I walked home in the rain feeling hollow, like I'd given away something essential, and there was nothing left to refill it. Tessa was the first person I told. She brought takeout, sat on my floor, listened, told me he didn't deserve me. The familiar balance returned, me caring for her, her caring for me, and I thought maybe this was the part where everything evened out. Then she asked me for a favor. She had applied for a job at my nonprofit and needed a reference. My stomach tightened. I knew how fragile her recovery still was, how easily stress could cut through it. Working together might help her, I told myself. Structure could be good. Being close might keep her steady. I said yes because no had never belonged to us. I advocated for her honestly. I talked about her resilience, her empathy, her growth. I translated her pain into a success story, and left out the nights on my bathroom floor, the fear, the shaking hands, the parts that didn't fit neatly into professional language. They hired her. She was brilliant at first. Early, polished, instantly loved. Coworkers stopped by my desk to tell me how incredible she was. I smiled and felt oddly invisible, like the match that lights the room and disappears. She borrowed my phrasing in meetings, my ideas, my tone, sometimes forgetting to credit me. She talked about understanding clients because she had actually suffered, and people admired her for it in a way that made my skin itch. When I gently asked her to be clearer about credit, she laughed and asked if I was jealous. She touched my arm, told me she was kidding, told me she adored me. I told myself I was being sensitive. At home, the exhaustion returned with a sharper edge. I wasn't just supporting her emotionally anymore. She was now intertwined with my work, my reputation, my daily environment. There was no space to breathe. One night she came over angry, pacing my living room, convinced people at work were threatened by her. When I tried to reflect what I was seeing, to suggest she slow down, she stopped and looked at me with a cold calm I didn't recognize. She said, "I liked helping because it made me feel superior." Something cracked open inside me. She accused me of disguising control as care, of needing her brokenness to feel whole. When she left, slamming my door, I stared at the crooked picture frame on my shelf and felt like I'd woken up in the wrong life. At work, she acted like nothing had happened. When I tried to bring it up, she said she didn't remember. She smiled like I was imagining things. I started questioning my own memory, my own reactions, my own sanity. Then things went wrong. Emails I'd written went out, altered. Complaints came in about conversations I hadn't been part of. When I checked records, I saw her name attached. When I asked her, she smiled and said she was just helping. Maybe I should double-check my own work. One afternoon I found her scrolling through my computer at my desk. When I asked her not to, she mocked me for being dramatic. The promotion email came on a Friday. They created a new role, essentially my role but higher, and gave it to her. She thanked everyone publicly and credited me for believing in her. People smiled at me like I should feel proud. In my director's office, I was told there were concerns about my boundaries, my emotional tone, my professionalism. No names. Just impressions. Advice to be more of a team player, more neutral, less personal. I knew exactly where they came from. When I confronted Tessa, she told me I was playing the victim, that people like me needed people like her to feel whole. She said it calmly, precisely, like she'd rehearsed it in therapy. I realized then that reacting would only prove her point. My responsibilities slowly disappeared. Meetings happened without me. Projects were reassigned. People became careful around me, like I might break. I started documenting everything, living like I was on trial without knowing the charge. In August, I was laid off. They said it was budget-related. They gave me a letter of recommendation that praised my passion while quietly warning that I was sensitive, intense, best suited for structured oversight. I understood then how thoroughly the story had been rewritten. But the layoff wasn't the real ending. It was just the moment everyone stopped pretending we were still on the same team. The next week I got an email from HR asking me to confirm I had returned all equipment, and attached to it was a list of incidents that I had never been shown before. They weren't dramatic. That was the genius of it. They were small, reasonable-sounding phrases, like emotionally reactive in feedback sessions, difficulty maintaining professional distance, tendency to personalize client outcomes. Reading them felt like watching someone describe me through fog, close enough to resemble me but wrong in the ways that matter. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop, going through old calendar invites, old drafts, old notes, trying to build a timeline that proved I wasn't the person they were describing. I found little things that made my stomach drop, meeting invites I hadn't been included on, decisions made after quick check-ins that somehow never involved me, and when I checked who scheduled them, I saw her name again and again. It was like discovering fingerprints in your house and realizing you stopped noticing the door was unlocked months ago. A former coworker called me one evening, her voice low like she was afraid her walls had ears, and she said she didn't know how to say this without sounding paranoid. She said Tessa had been telling people, gently, almost sweetly, that I was struggling, that I had caregiver burnout, that I needed rest, that I sometimes blurred lines. She said it was always said with concern, never as an accusation which made it impossible to challenge. If you denied it, you looked defensive. If you stayed quiet, it sounded true. That was the moment I realized what I was up against. It wasn't a fight, it was a narrative, and she had been building it while I was still trying to be fair. I started drafting a message to Mariana, a careful one that didn't sound emotional, one that didn't sound like retaliation. I wrote and deleted sentences for an hour. In the end, I sent nothing, because I could already hear Tessa's voice in my head saying, "See, you can't let it go. You always need to be right." And the thought of proving her correct made me nauseous. At night, my body kept reliving the collapse. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, throat tight, mind racing, and I'd check my phone like I expected a new text, a new complaint, another quiet weapon. Sometimes I would stare at my own hands and think, how did I become someone who flinches at notifications? How did helping someone survive turn into me watching my own life shrink? Tessa texted me days later saying she missed me. I stared at the message for a long time and didn't respond. The worst part was that my first instinct was still to comfort her, to smooth it over, to make the tension disappear. I hated that instinct, but it was still there. Like a reflex my body hadn't learned to untrain. 2 months after that, an envelope arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a printed copy of my recommendation letter, the same one I'd already seen, But this time there were handwritten notes in the margins, like someone had been reviewing it, circling phrases, underlining structured oversight, drawing little arrows. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I told myself it could have been a mistake, someone else's mail, but my name was on it, and the notes were in a handwriting I recognized from college. Sharp and slanted, the kind that used to fill our notebooks with jokes. I held the pages in my hands and felt something go cold in my chest. She hadn't just wanted me gone. She had wanted me defined. When I ran into her months later at a grocery store, she looked healthy, polished, untouched. She said she needed her life back, and I'd been holding on too tightly. I realized she would never admit what she'd done, because in her mind it wasn't betrayal, it was survival. I found another job eventually, smaller and quieter. It took months for my body to stop bracing, to stop expecting the floor to drop out. Sometimes I still think about that night on my bathroom floor, the way I begged her to stay alive, and I understand now how easily love can turn into leverage. Some people don't destroy you by screaming. They do it by smiling, by borrowing your compassion, by quietly convincing everyone that you are the unstable one. I still care. I still listen. But now I know that saving someone does not guarantee they will recognize your light. Sometimes the person you pull out of the dark needs to erase the one who saw them there.